I am Kristi Williams. I am now a single mom of two toddlers, a 3.5-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter. I got married in 2013 after a whirlwind courtship. My late husband, Alan, he came from a very abusive background, very poor, was a very hard worker, wanted to earn everything that he had. And he was just a mechanical genius. I mean, he was a licensed electrician, a plumber, a pipe fitter, a welder. He would innovate and invent different things and experiment with them. He was a really great leader, even though he was quiet. He wasn't perfect. He had trouble sometimes communicating, but overall he had a heart for people, and he is hands down the most generous person I've ever met in my life. I literally have seen him give the shirt off of his back to someone or take his hat off and give it to somebody else because it would mean more to them or they needed it. Possessions had no hold on him because he knew what it was to not have, and he didn't want anyone else to experience that. If he could do little things to give to people to brighten their day, he would. He was also extremely active. When we moved down to San Antonio from the Dallas area after having our son, he got a job at HEB, and he was an ultra marathoner at the time. And so he decided to join the HEB bike team because he also liked biking. He'd been biking everywhere since he was young to get to one of his many jobs so that he could eat when he was in middle and high school. And so he joined the HEB bike team, which was pretty natural. He did that at the beginning of June 2017. And he was really excited to have this community of cyclists. And so he signed up to fundraise and make money for the MS 150. And he would go out and train multiple times a week. Our daughter was due at the end of August. And my pregnancy was not pretty. She was due at the end of August, and in July, I woke up one day with Bell's palsy. I had the flu twice, pertussis, a sinus infection, and an extreme stomach bug while I was pregnant with her. I had really wanted to have a natural birth, but I wasn't able to because of all the diagnoses that I had had. So we scheduled a C-section for August 29th. And because she was a large baby, she was not 37 weeks, but she was over 9 pounds. Well, they told us her blood sugar is not regulating well. You either have to put her on this high calorie formula or we're going to have to take her down to like the NICU. And I thought the NICU was just for tiny babies, but it's not. And so we decided to use the formula, and my husband fed her for the 3 days that we were in the hospital, and she napped with him, and I got to sleep, which is great because I had just had major surgery. And then we went home on Friday, and my husband made dinner for everyone. My parents came over. My sister had been in town the weekend before. I mean, we had just seen everyone they wanted to visit that month. So it'd been a really hectic month, but a good month. And the next morning, he had decided to get up to continue his training because the MS 150 was coming up in about 6 weeks. And so that morning, he was running late because our son woke up, and he fed our son. And he had made me breakfast, and he kissed everyone goodbye, said, "I love you." He had plans to take our son to HEB, which was their favorite thing because he was teaching our son to enjoy all the samples that HEB offered. And so he went off on his bike ride, and I was home with babies. And my mom, with her siblings, had collected a bunch of donations for Hurricane Harvey because it was that weekend. And so they went out with my son to disseminate all the goods that they had collected in the neighborhood. And so they were gone. So it was just my daughter and I at home. And at about 9:38 that morning, he was struck by a car. He had been 15 minutes late, so he wasn't with the group. He was trying to catch up. He was on the shoulder. It was a straightaway. No curves, no hills, bright, sunny, 9:30 in the morning. He was struck from behind by a distracted driver who was a police officer off duty. He was driving a Ford F-350 going 78 miles an hour in a 65 mile an hour zone on his phone. I saw my husband was going to move over and hit him. And my husband was projected 100 feet forward, and his fall was broken by 2 mailboxes and a street sign. Through God's provision and the cars behind, there were 2 trauma nurses and a doctor. They said that Alan tried to get up almost like a natural reflex, never opened his eyes, never said anything, but kind of pushed up, groaned, fell back, and never regained consciousness. They called 911. He was transported to University Trauma Center, where he arrested once in the ambulance and they brought him back, and then he arrested again at the hospital, and he did not come back. He was also an organ donor, but because he had had a mass transfusion, which basically means that every drop of his blood he had bled out internally, had been replaced by universal. They didn't know what his blood type was, so they couldn't harvest tissue or his eyes. Every single internal organ in his diaphragm had suffered massive trauma, so they couldn't harvest any of that either, which I think probably would have frustrated him because he was such a giver, and he definitely wanted his body to be used if it could be. And he was 36 years old, so he definitely could have helped a lot of people in that respect. And that was, I kind of look at it like it wasn't just taken from us, it was taken from a lot of prospective people that could have benefited from him. My mom was in his phone as mom, so she actually got the call first from University trying to track me down. And so her and her siblings started heading towards me. She was getting a hold of my dad, who also worked for HEB and was in the Hurricane Harvey Command Center. So hard to get a hold of. My aunts stayed with my kids while I went to the hospital, and I got this call. And I didn't answer it. I didn't recognize the number. And they left a message. And I'm like, why is University calling me? I was at Methodist. I just gave birth at Methodist. This doesn't make sense. But in the message, she called me Chris, and only Alan called me Chris. So I called her back, and she told me that he had been in an accident. It was critical condition, and he was coming over. When I called my mom, she was on her way. They got there within 10 minutes, and 2 of my uncles were driving me to the hospital. And the whole time on the way, I'm just, you're kind of like half shock, half panic. Like, please God, don't like whatever it is, let him recover, let him recover. That was the prayer of my heart. Let him recover, let him recover. We turned on the medical drive, and I can only describe it as in my mind's eye. I don't know how else to describe it. He was right there next to me, and he just said, Chris, I love you so much. And then he was gone. And after that, just the natural prayer in my heart changed to, Lord, let me handle this well, whatever's coming. And so we got to University, and they showed me to a private waiting room, which is never good. A private waiting room does not have positive connotations, and they brought in the surgeon who had treated my husband, and a counselor, Rosalva, who was amazing. And they told me, and the first thing I said was no. And the second thing was, what do I do? We just had a baby. What do I do? And here I was, 4 days from major abdominal surgery, an 18-month-old son, a 4-day-old daughter. I was a public school teacher for 12 years. So this had been the first week of school at Reagan High School. So I was 4 days into unpaid maternity leave. What do I do? And he was in the next room, and I did not want to see him. But Rosalva encouraged me to do so. And And it was really good to say goodbye, that I did. My family showed up, and I wanted to be the one to call his family, and so I did that. And then it was just a blur, kind of shock, figuring out, tons of thoughts go through your head, like, hey, bills are due, because now it's September 1st, bills are due today. And how do I explain to my son, who is inseparable with his dad, and they go everywhere together, that he's never going to see him again? How do you explain death to an 18-month-old who hasn't even used the word love yet? My daughter, she was my lifeline. Her name means shining light. And if I had not had a newborn daughter, which people would look at my situation and be like, oh, I would never want that. But she made me eat. She made me get up out of bed. She had no idea what was going on. And so I had to be there for her. And I think we all, whether we're cognizant of it or not, get faced with this choice. It may be dressed up in different language, but it's, what do you believe? And I had to make that choice. I had said I was a Christian since I was 7 years old. But what do I actually believe when push comes to shove? Because some of us that say we're Christians and something like this happens say, I don't. I'm angry at you. I don't like what you did. I believe you only when it's good. Some people who don't believe will come to believe. Some people who don't believe will push further away. And so I had to choose, do I want to be angry? Because that is a serious temptation. And you do want to be angry. But is that fair to my kids? I had these two babies, and their life was irrevocably changed, even though they don't completely realize it. But how was I going to be for them? And so that was my choice. And I made the choice that, you know what? I believe that God is good. And so looking back, through this serious sucker punch of pain, which I'd never experienced emotional pain that manifested itself physically. And it was very hard. There's no other way to say it. There were a lot of good things that didn't seem good at the time. Us being sick, so sick for months, both of us, and getting to stay at home together and spend time together. The reconciliation with his brother, having so much family that was so overwhelming, want to come visit us before we had this baby, and me thinking like, ugh, could we just come after the baby? Because y'all are going to want to see the baby anyways. But it was good, having a baby that was big and came early. If my daughter had come on her due date, which was actually September 7th, she would have never met her father. So having preeclampsia and having to have her early was good. Having a big baby that needed to be fed formula and got to be fed and cuddled with her dad for the days that he had with her was good. Things that I thought of that were not good in the moment, not what I wanted in the moment, God was using for good, and I didn't even know it. And it's completely shifted my perspective as to how to look at life, how I process life. What is it's actually worth being upset about or worry about or what have you. In grief, and you can grieve for a myriad of things. It's not just death. But in grief, I found that there are two major pitfalls, at least there were for me. And one was using the word deserve, the dangerous D word. I don't deserve this, or the idea that things are unfair. As a Christian, what we deserve as sinners, as those who are broken, is death. Without salvation is eternal damnation. And Alan and I had done everything right. We went to church. We prayed together. We did devotions together. We were raising our kids in the Lord. We were educating them. We spent time as a family. We were building up our home. We were fiscally responsible. We had no debt. All these things that you are supposed to do, that are the most responsible things you can do, we were doing. We were taking care of our health, etc. We didn't deserve it. But the temptation to fall into the deserve and what I deserve mindset was one that I felt really led down a road to anger, bitterness, and resentment. And the idea of deserve just led to so many pitfalls. And so I didn't deserve anything. And I had been given all these gifts. Alan was a gift. I was a gift to him. The kids were a gift. The house was a gift. Out of the outpouring of God's love for us, we had immense provision, and the blow was cushioned as much as God could. I mean, it was this massive gift and this love that he had for us that a lot of times we miss if we take the mindset of deserve. That kind of sets us up as God, because then we're deciding what is deserved and what's not, and that's not our job. And the second major pitfall is asking the question, why? Especially when something happens to someone who's young, tragic, sudden, whether it be disease or an accident or what have you. Why? And for me, the answer came from God. And God said, because I love him. I love Alan. I love Alan more than you do. I created him. He's mine. He was never yours. He was never your husband. He was my son. And I love him so much, I gave you to him. I love him so much, I gave the kids to him. I love him so much, I gave him this house, more than he had ever had in his life, growing up in poverty and abuse. More love than Alan had ever experienced. And I took him in a fast, probably from what I'm told by the physicians, painless way. And he never knew what hit him. And he just saw me. And I took him when he was at his happiest. There was no disappointment in his day. There was no sadness. He had just had a daughter. It was an outpouring of love. And this was God's love story with Alan. It was never my love story with Alan. I was just part of God's love story with him. And Alan was part of God's love story with me. And so the why question was because I love him. Why would I leave him in this broken world? You know, I've come to realize that we really can only have a couple of expectations out of life. What we expect of the world is that it's broken and will therefore function in a broken way. Do not be surprised. Do not be disappointed. It's a broken world. What we expect of God is that God is going to do his will. Whether or not you are on board with it, he is going to do his will. And his will is good if you let it. If you fight it and you create your own problems, but he's going to do it. And the expectation I have of myself now is that I will do whatever is asked of me with the best attitude I possibly can. Whether it's what I want or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is how I respond, not a reaction, but how I respond, and that I respond well and responsibly, not just to be the best mom I can for my kids, but to hopefully provide some hope to other people who are suffering as well, whatever the loss may be. So outside of those expectations, I used to be a planner. I just don't anymore. I used to have expectations on all these things that I wanted and that I thought were important. They're not. All that's important are people, being kind and loving, and rolling with it. Distracted driving has obviously now played a major role in my life with the loss of my husband. And the young man, I say this to people, who has it worse? Is it my little family, or is it the young man who has to live with the fact that he killed my husband? He was a police officer, so obviously his heart was one to serve, to help, and that's not what happened because he didn't put down his phone. And so partnering with Safe to Save it's not going to eliminate all distracted driving. I mean, there's only so much that legislation can do. I've thought a lot about this. I mean, you get distracted, you caught up in your thoughts. There's a certain amount of personal choice, but if we can incentivize putting the phone down and create some personal accountability, it's only going to help. And I mean, this young man, he was 28 years old. He has a young wife, and now he faces felony charges for criminally negligent homicide. And did he make a decision that's different than millions of American drivers every day? No, he didn't. We get in our cars and we decide to roll those dice. It's a gamble. And we say, whether we realize we're saying this or not, it's not going to be me today. But you don't know. I didn't know that that day, September 2nd, was going to be the last day I saw my husband. And that young man had no idea that that was going to be the last day of his life and his future as he knew it. And now he faces life as an indicted felon. But it's a choice we all have to make.